right, good morning. Welcome to Inside Pages on Metro Television. My name is Aldo Moro. It's a pleasure coming your way. It's a beautiful Saturday morning. Here on Inside Pages, what we do is that we look through the pages of the newspapers. We identify what we believe would be or is the most topical issue for the day, and we invite the we invite the right guests and ask them the relevant questions on your behalf. And that's going to be the same this morning on Inside Pages. Now, here on Inside Pages this morning, we have, as usual, two conversations to have. One has to do with the mid-year budget review presentation by the Finance Minister. The Finance Minister calls it an incumbent mid-year budget review, and the Finance Minister says that adequate measures have been put in place to turn the corner as far as Ghana's economy is concerned. And it says that modest gains have been made. We will be interrogating what the Finance Minister has said and to ask whether the data actually supports what the Finance Minister has said in terms of we're reversing or we're on the right track in terms of fixing or putting the economy back on track. We'll be speaking to Professor GODFRED BOKPIN, who is an economist and a professor of finance, University of Ghana Business School. He will help us make sense of the mid-year budget review. That's one. Now, the second topic is that after all the suspicions and the perceptions and the talk, little petty talk here and there, about where the president's heart really lies, in terms of the persons who are contesting the NPP flag bearership race, the president has been forced to come out and state categorically that he's not throwing his support behind any of the candidates or any of the aspirants. He said it is not in the interest of the party, and it is not in his own personal interest to show any support to any of the candidates. Whoever wins the internal contest, he's fine with that. We would be, again, interrogating whether what the president has said is something that we can accept wholly or not. And also, what is it that the president must do going forward to walk the talk? Because the president's comments has also triggered all kinds of reactions from some of the aspirants as well. And so we'll tell you what some of the aspirants have said and what needs to happen going forward. So it promises to be a very interesting morning on Inside Pages today. So when I come back after the break, I'll be sharing with you the WhatsApp line for those of you who have an opinion or a view to express, a contribution to make, and then we'll take it from there. My name once again is Aldo Moro. Thanks for tuning in and thanks for joining us. I'll be right back. All right, welcome back. This is Inside Pages on Metro Television. My name is Aldo Moro. I did indicate at the start of the show that I have two very important conversations to have. One has to do with the presentation of the mid-year budget review by the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta. It happened on Monday. The Finance Minister said, we're making steady progress in turning the economy around. He says, we're turning the corner. Not everybody agrees with the Finance Minister's assertion that we're turning the corner because some say the data does not support what the Finance Minister has said. Let's go to Parliament. First of all, listen to the Finance Minister and also listen to what some of the MPs have said. And then we'll go straight ahead with our first interview. We'll be speaking to Professor GODFRED BOKPIN, who is an economist and also a professor of finance, who would help us make sense of what the Finance Minister has been telling Ghanaians. So watch this.
We also secured IMF financing equivalent to 3 times Ghana's quota. We front-loaded disbursement of IMF resources with 40% in 2023 and the rest to be spread between 2024 and 2026, and successfully concluded a domestic exchange program. The results are clear. We are witnessing the catalytic impact of crowding in other resources. We are in discussions with the World Bank for a 900 million development policy operation and emergency support. The United States, through the International Development Finance Corporation, has announced a program to invest $300 million towards the construction of a data center under the G7 Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investments. This is through the Development Finance Corporation of the U.S. Mr. Speaker, several key stakeholders played diverse roles in Ghana's successful journey towards approval of the IMF-supported program. On behalf of His Excellency the President, I would like to again express our sincere gratitude to the Right Honourable Speaker, members of Parliament, our participating bondholders, retirees, financial institutions, and other stakeholders who played critical roles. The eventual passage of all fiscal measures in the 2023 budget by the House and the completion of the DDEP program. I have also discussed the significant improvements in the key macroeconomic indicators, including inflation, exchange rate, interest rates, reserve position, growth rate, and the performance of the bank since 2022. Mr. Speaker, all these developments, together with the need to align with the targets of the IMF-supported PC-PEC program, warrant a division to the macroeconomic framework. This was necessary because the framework was guided by the September 2022 data that underpinned the 2023 budget in November 2022. The amount comprises receipts from the 63rd to the 68th liftings from the Jubilee Field, the 20th and 21st liftings from the 10 fields, and the 9th and 10th and 11th liftings from the Sankofa Jinyami Field. In addition to the total receipts for the year under review, petroleum receipts that spilled over from 2021 to 2022 was $14.82 million, bringing the total amount distributed to $1.44 billion. This compares with the amount distributed of $808.6 million for the same period in 2021. A total of $581.5 million was transferred into the Ghana Petroleum Funds in 2022 compared to $227 million in 2021. Out of the amount transferred, the Ghana Heritage Fund received $174 million against $68 million in 2021, while the Ghana Stabilization Fund received $407.06 million compared to $159.24 million in 2021.
Look, Mr. Speaker, from where we are going, I will not be surprised if during the main budget we move away or inclusive of COVID and Russia, Ukraine, they add Niger. The conflict in Niger is also contributing to the problems of Ghana. Mr. Speaker, because of these bad policies of your government, the Korean government says that they no longer would advance the $1 billion facility to us. Mr. Speaker, I'm not surprised that a majority leader is running away. What the MPP fear in this world is facts. When they are faced with facts, incontrovertible evidence, they disappear. Habib is also running away. But I'm not surprised at all. As a matter of fact, when the financial sector is unstable, it is still that tree of life that will resort to. And we set up laws here to say that by the 31st of March, auditors should come and tell us what is happening to that tree of life. Mr. Speaker, this year when they went, March ended, they didn't come. April, the auditors were not coming. May, June, July, we got suspicious and say something is happening to our tree of life because it's not normal that for 4 months, the auditors have not come. Last Friday, they came and said that the tree has been cut and bent into ashes. The tree of life, Bank of Ghana, has been cut and bent into ashes. And we said, why didn't you report them to the police? Because this is criminal. Then they say, oh, the governor and the board of directors said that they have not uprooted the roofs. So when we continue to water it will regenerate. And you are here reading a budget, a media review. Mr. Speaker, the 70 billion loss in reserve. Even if we were to say that we were not going to impair government of Ghana debt, which was 48 billion, there is still a loss of 22 billion. So the problem is not the impairment of government debt.
On inflation, we jumped up to 54%. Mr. Speaker, as we speak today, inflation has dropped to 42.5%. yes, it is not in levels that we expect, but in the midst of the global hikes in inflation, we are struggling to contain the situation, but we have turned a difficult situation from 54% to 42%, and this is reflected in the goods and services of the country. Fuel prices jumped in that period up to 24 cedis per liter. Mr. Speaker, as we speak today, that has dropped to about 12 cedis. And that indeed is a good story of turning the corner. And they know it. That is why they are disappointed. Mr. Speaker, when we talk about the exchange rate, our friends know that in December, we were talking about 15 cedis to $1. And when we say we have turned the corner, it means that we have been able to reverse the difficult exchange rate situation to what we have today, about 10 to 11 cedis to the dollar. That is turning the corner, and they know. They are disappointed about the good story, the hope and confidence that the Ghanaian economy has turned around.
If you want to compare the economy of the past government to President Akufo-Addo's government, today's government, Mr. Speaker, I would just pick two areas. Industry was growing at 1% in 2015, around the same time as we speak, whilst industry today is growing at 3%. The Speaker, even in the face of COVID and Russia, Ukraine. The Speaker, even agriculture, that was growing negatively in their time, today is having a positive sign in 2022. So it tells a certain story. Mr. Speaker, if you give these two parties or these two governments opportunity to rule Ghana, one of them have the propensity to push this country forward better than the other. And of course, certainly the one that is going to push the country forward would not be them, but it will be us.
Mr. Speaker, I believe as a Ghanaians, if we redefine and change our attitude towards work, if we redefine and change our mind that we are all going to build a nation, I believe that with all this high time, we'll be able to come out from this particular hardship. Mr. Speaker, I know that if you compare the NDC government with MPP, MPP is far better managers of this particular economy. And my friends from the other side can actually attest to it. So, Mr. Speaker, one thing I want Ghanaians to know, that the NDC is not a good manager of this particular economy. Yes. And we have the men, and as I said, that we are rebuilding the nation, and we will build it and fix it. And Ghanaians will realize by 2024, Ghanaians will actually renew their mandate of this particular government, and we will continue and we will break the eight. And let me tell my friends that they should prepare and remain in opposition, because the MPP government is going to actually rebuild the nation and redevelop whatever mess that we have caused, and we are going through to actually ensure that everything is on course.
This media review budget was more of a soundtrack to please the IMF and to play to the IMF and to satisfy the IMF than to satisfy the suffering Ghanaian people, than to relieve the business and private sector of Ghana, whose businesses have collapsed because of the bad management of the Nana Akufo-Addo government. Mr. Speaker, I'll take you through memory lane. In paragraph 2 of page 12 of the 2019 budget statement, this is what the Minister for Finance said, and I quote, "We are now on course to exit the IMF program. By the end of this year, it has been a collective effort by all of us, government, for exercising the kind of macroeconomic competence and discipline that was evidently lacking in the past. So it's now evidently present that you are competent, you are incompetent, and you are indisciplined, and you call yourself better managers of the economy. Why are you back to the IMF? If in 2019 you said exiting the IMF was the best thing to happen to this country, then it means that you have demonstrated mismanagement of the Ghanaian economy."
The crisis we are in is self-inflicted, a crisis created by President Akufo-Addo, by the Vice President who is manager of the economic management team, who chairs the economic management team. It's been a total disaster. As he goes around the country campaigning now, he only talks about digitalization. He does not account for his stewardship as chair of the economic management team. Then we have the finance minister, who, Mr. Speaker, the president told us, assured his party and our colleagues who rebelled against the finance minister, that after the IMF program, this minister will be shown the door. He will be asked to go home. The president clearly, as has become his stock in trade, cannot be trusted to keep his word and has kept the finance minister in office. That is very, very disappointing. Mr. Speaker, talking about the IMF program, I was really surprised to see from the minister's budget statement at page 6. This is a minister who assured this House and assured the Ghanaian people that we will not go to the IMF. He will not lead us to the IMF. Now, Mr. Speaker, at page 6, paragraph 36, the minister states, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, it is instructive to note that our journey towards securing an IMF-supported program has been characterized by speed and tact. Incredible, Mr. Speaker. The man who says he won't go to the IMF now says we should give him credit that he has gone with speed and tact.
Its own action of excessive money printing and the government reckless borrowing caused this mess that we are seeing. The Speaker, permit me to borrow a fancy proverb which says, to wit, the elephant will suffer, but the hunter will suffer soon. So, Speaker, the Bank of Ghana felt that they are destroying banks. Today, their actions and inaction has landed them there. So, Speaker, that is where we are as a country. So, Speaker, let me also add, the Bank of Ghana cannot, Speaker, and I repeat, the Bank of Ghana cannot unilaterally write off government debt without the approval of Parliament. The government can also not, they cannot force the Bank of Ghana to do same without parliamentary approval. The Bank of Ghana and the executive arm of government have written off nearly 48.4 billion Ghana cedis of government debt onto Bank of Ghana without parliamentary approval. So, Speaker, we cannot sit and allow this to happen. So, Speaker, the Bank of Ghana is a sovereign bank. The shareholders are the people of Ghana. So, Speaker, we are the representative of Ghanaians, and we should be given the opportunity to allow this to happen. So, Speaker, we cannot allow this. And I serve notice that we will not allow the Bank of Ghana and the executive arm of government to unilaterally write off Bank of Ghana's debt, government debt worth 48.4 billion Ghana cedis.
Some money will be left. From what I have noted down, I believe about 3 billion will still be left for the minister to play around with. We pray that more money will come in, and I know more money will come in. And so these are areas that I want us to work together with the Minister for Finance to ensure the judicious application of these monies that we are told will come in. There are important critical areas that we have to look at. These are what I have noted down, and I think that the minister should commit himself to those areas.
All right, so those were highlights of what happened in Parliament. We saw the finance minister present the budget, and then we saw some reactions from Castle Atto-Forson, Dr. Castle Atto-Forson, who is the minority leader. We also heard from the MP for Ejiso, Dr. John Kuma, who is also the deputy finance minister. And then we also heard from the former minority leader, Haruna Idrisu, MP for Tamale South. We also heard from the MP for Bolgatanga Central, I believe I got that correctly. That's Mr. Isaac Adongo, who is also the acting, minority spokesperson on finance and the economy. All right, so let's do this. Let's now go to somebody who teaches economics and finance to walk us through what you and I need to know about, first of all, what was the relevance of the mid-year budget review and what would his take? And from where he sits, does he agree with the finance minister that the economy is shaping up quite nicely? Let's go to Professor Bokpin. That's Professor GODFRED Bokpin. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Pages on Metro Television.
Yes, good morning, and good morning to our cherished viewers and listeners.
Right.
Thank you for having me on your show this morning.
And thank you very much for accepting to talk to us. You're a very busy man, so we're not going to keep you on Zoom or online for a very long time. But what do you think the mid-year budget review was seeking to communicate to Ghanaians who watched and listened or have read what the finance minister has said? What sense should they make from this presentation?
Okay, thank you very much. I think the mid-year budget review is necessary also in fulfillment of the law, the Act, the Public Financial Management Act. But also more importantly, the budget is an important policy document and that also acts as an input in the decision making of businesses and households. So you see that the budget, the review is largely categorized into three thematic areas. One is to update Ghanaians to Parliament largely how the economy fared in the previous year, because at the time they presented the substantive budget in November last year, full year data wasn't available about the performance of the economy, the fiscal outing, and all of that. So the mid-year budget review gives us that opportunity then to update ourselves comprehensively about how the economy performed in the previous year. Then again, the mid-year review also gives us the opportunity to validate the assumptions underlying the budget. The understanding is that every forecast is as good as the assumptions underlying those forecasts. So 8 months ago, the perspective of the government about how the economy was going to perform, you will see that in July, that position has shifted. So the mid-year review gives us opportunity to revalidate the assumptions, and for that reason, recalibrate the targets or revise the targets in line with the new reality. So you will see that in the mid-year review, it gives us the opportunity to revise the macro targets, and we'll go into those specifics and whether the revision of the macro targets and all of that.
Hello, Prof. So sorry about that. We seem to have some reception challenges with Professor GODFRED BOKPIN, and whilst he was talking to us via Zoom, we'll work the lines again and get a better connection to Professor GODFRED BOKPIN. He's an economist and also a professor of finance, University of Ghana Business School. He'll be joining us again. He'll be rejoining the Zoom link. But he set the tone for what promises to be a very insightful and a very, very interesting conversation thus far. And he was actually building the premises for his analysis of the revised or the recalibrated macro targets. Yeah, Prof, welcome back.
Yes. Is it better now?
Yes, it's very, very, very good. We're good to go.
All right, great. So the mid-year review in this particular context also gives us the opportunity to align our economic strategy with the IMF-supported program. Now we've seen the document. Of course, in November last year, when government presented the 2023 budget, the broad framework and all of that, and what entered the budget at the end, they largely had the blessing of the IMF. But now that the program has been approved with all the targets, the indicative targets, the qualitative targets, the structural benchmarks, and all of that, we are in a better position now to align our strategy with that. And you can see that some of the revisions, particularly the revision with respect to GDP growth, is essential to align that with the projections in the IMF-supported program.
Now, Prof.
Hello?
Yes, Prof. You said that one of the key objectives of this media review, it's a budget review, is also to validate or to confirm the assumptions that were made at the beginning of the year, November thereabouts, when the budget was being read. and to, find out
Yeah.
whether you can meet those targets or not. Now, I've had some people, even before you walk us through the revised targets or the recalibrated targets, and then I'll pick your thoughts as to whether even the ones that have now been given are achievable. We'll get there. But there's one of the raging debates is whether or not government was overly ambitious at the beginning of the year when it was reading the November budget, and whether the assumptions that underlined those projected targets were faulty, or it is absolutely normal that you're going into an IMF program, you haven't sealed the deal yet, so you can be forgiven if you make certain assumptions that do not turn out to be real.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Okay. Well, we seem to be having some challenges with Zoom link. We're sorry about that. It doesn't really happen. It doesn't often happen here at Metro, but for some reason this morning it's been a bit, the line has been acting a bit funny. But we'll try and fix that and get Professor Bokpin back to continue with his submission on his take on the media budget review. Prof, we sincerely apologize for the hiccup.
Yeah. Is it better now?
Yes, it's good. We're good.
Okay, great. So if you look at the posture of government 8 months ago, they were overly ambitious. And we said it when they presented the 2023 budget that it was not possible to achieve those targets, particularly with respect to inflation. If you look at where inflation was at that time and the year-end target of 18.9%, that was almost very difficult to achieve. Now, what you see with the mid-year budget review is that government is less optimistic now about the target it set for itself at the beginning of the year compared to 8 months ago. And almost all the important macro numbers have been revised downwards. And then again, if you see the level of variance, in those revised targets, it also raises questions about assumptions underlining those forecasts in the first place. For instance, when it comes to overall GDP growth, we have revised the GDP growth numbers from 2.8% to 1.5%. The variance is more than 45%. If it comes to non-oil GDP growth, again, we have revised that, then the variance is 50%. If it comes to inflation, the variance is more than 65%. Now, if you look at overall GDP growth and you relate that to population growth, because GDP is projected to grow at 1.5%, population is growing annually around 2%. So if you look at our economy, the strength of our economy in GDP per capita terms, our economy is actually entering a recession. Now, that alone doesn't give you the impression that you have turned the corner. But again, if you look at all the other variables, you could not conclusively conclude that the economy has turned the corner. But of course, we can also see some relative stability in the economy, especially coming from the foreign exchange market. But then again, it's simply because the economy is not in full gear. Okay, the economy is not in full gear. We are not honoring all our commitments as we're supposed to important stakeholders, even including taking advantage of the debt service suspension initiative under the G20 framework. And then again, in terms of our commitment to independent power producers, then again, to so many other stakeholders. Then again, you can see the general slowdown in also imports in terms of the traffic at the ports and all of that. So if you put all these things together, it's too early or it's premature to conclude that we have turned the corner. Of course, we have seen signs. We need to build on that. We need to consolidate that. But again, if you look at the approach we have adopted, largely, it tells you that things may get a little worse before they improve. And that is what is reflecting in the lower GDP projection for 2023, from 3.1% in 2022 to 1.5% in 2023. This is also consistent with the implications of fiscal consolidation, especially when it is predicated on revenue enhancement and minimal on wasteful expenditure cuts.
Now, Prof, one of the things that you have said quite consistently is that usually when a country finds itself in a debt unsustainable situation, you have three options. You either look at debt operations, you look at fiscal adjustment, and you look at structural adjustment. But
Yes.
you've been wondering why there's been a lot of focus on debt operations and not the other two. Now, after listening to the finance minister present that mid-year budget review, do you get a sense that there's been a little shift in policy in terms of where to tackle our problems from in terms of our levels of debt?
No.
Okay.
That is not coming across at all.
Okay.
Unfortunately, government has adopted what we would say a lazy approach, right? They are looking at the low-hanging fruits. So, and as a country, we have not gathered the courage to do the needful, which would impose burden on the duty bearers. So when they preach, we preach burden sharing and practice burden transfer. Okay. So on one hand, government is talking about burden sharing, but in practice, they are actually transferring the burden to ordinary Ghanaians. And that is what we've been doing to ourselves consistently. Now, if you see the level of fiscal adjustment in the IMF supported program, we knew from day one that fiscal adjustment alone will not be able to enable the country to restore debt sustainability. We knew that. And that is why we said that there is the need for debt restructuring with some level of haircut. That is unavoidable. Then again, but if you look at that triangle of debt restructuring, fiscal adjustment, and then structural reform, also link that to governance reform, you will see that the burden is proportionately shifted to debt restructuring. A good way to understand this is to look at the balance sheet of the central bank. Now you will see that because the government didn't make much progress, especially with the first round of the domestic debt restructuring, even though government claimed success, they only restructured just around 83 billion cedis of the domestic debt. Okay, and actually, if you look at the yield curve that the government was planning to introduce with the debt restructuring, the original debt restructuring, which was announced on December 5th, you see clearly that the government didn't get exactly what it wanted. Then again, if you look at the outlook with the external debt restructuring, external commercial, external bilateral, given the fact that the multilateral debt, which as at the end of 2022 stood at $8.8 billion, had been excluded from the debt restructuring because to the IMF and the World Bank and the multilateral institutions, they were the lenders of last resort. And therefore, the balance sheet of the lenders of the last resort should not be impaired. Now, even though this was the position of the IMF, when it came to the central bank, that same principle didn't apply because in Ghana, the central bank is also the lender of last resort, but the central bank's exposure to the central bank wasn't excluded. And therefore, we use the balance sheet of the central bank as a balancing figure. Okay, so the central bank now had to take a deeper haircut, even on the principal amount, in order to move us closer to the debt sustainability journey. And by so doing, we have essentially impaired the balance sheet of the central bank, and their equity is hugely negative. And again, that has implication. You can debate whether that would affect their policy solvent role primarily, or what implication that will have. But we cannot run away from it, both economic and financial implications. So that is where we are. So government has not done the needful. And it's not just this government. If you see the approach since 1992, of course, you also see variation. You see that the successive government have been unwilling to do the needful, that impact duty bearers. And therefore, the practice has been that let's preach burden sharing, but in practice, let's transfer the burden to stakeholders And as we've seen, and that is why the recovery is going to be slow and is going to be painful, because we are not pursuing the optimal mix of debt restructuring, fiscal adjustment, and structural reform. The understanding in the literature is that the structural reform and the governance reform usually will take time to bear fruit. Even though we look at it in terms of the medium to the long term, it doesn't mean you should postpone when it should be done. It has to be done now. And the reforms are more effective if they are bundled together or if they reinforce each other. And as it stands now, you can see that not much has been initiated in the area of structural reforms, in the area of governance reforms or product market reforms. Not much has been initiated in that area. Then again, if you look at the fiscal adjustment, government again adopted a low-hanging fruit. Government again adopted a low-hanging fruit by loading more than 50% of the fiscal adjustment on revenue enhancement measures. What that tells you is that if you want to increase your tax to GDP ratio by even 1 percentage point, and you don't even use appropriate tax handles in terms of the mix, again, it will disproportionately affect households and private sector and constrain the ability of the private sector to grow, which also represent the job creation capacity of the economy. And that is why, if you look at the fiscal consolidation predicated largely on revenue enhancement, is going to impact growth process. The pass-through effect will be through growth, but how could we have done this? So you see that the balance between governance costs across central government or general government, in terms of central government ministries, department, agencies, state-owned enterprises, in the last 25 years, you could see that that line has been increasing. That line has been increasing. Now, when it comes to the expenditure line, which will promote growth, we have some expenditure cut that will hurt growth. We also have some expenditure cut that will promote growth. Under this particular program, the expenditure cuts are the ones that will hurt growth. And that is why we have issues with that. And therefore, the fiscal consolidation mix is not appropriate. It's not optimal. It's heavily on the side of revenue. But again, the revenue handles that we are using are also suboptimal and will have implication for poverty reduction, will have implication for worsening inequality. These are the issues that I think we needed to take into consideration. But a good way to judge fiscal consolidation is 3 spheres. One is the pace. Okay, and the pace here, we have adopted the fast pace approach, which we call front loading. So we wanted all the adjustment largely to be done within the shortest possible time. We could have either done that or probably do it over a medium to long-term period. But given the situation where we find ourselves, we chose a front-loaded approach. No problem about that. Then the next important dynamic is the mix. Is it revenue-based alone or expenditure-based? We chose both. So our fiscal consolidation is a mix, method 1. In other words, both revenue enhancement and expenditure rationalization. But in terms of the balance, is heavily predicated on revenue enhancement. So if you look at the IMF-supported program, more than 50% of the fiscal savings from the fiscal adjustment is going to come from revenue. Because in the next 3 years, up to 2026, the fiscal adjustment is only going to contribute just 5% of GDP. That is what the savings we are hoping to make from the fiscal adjustment. Meanwhile, if you look at where your debt to GDP is in present value terms, you need to do no less than 12% of fiscal balance in terms of your primary balance must not be less than 12% consistent in the next 3 years. Now, given that the fiscal adjustment is only contributing 5%, that gives you an idea that the burden is going to be borne disproportionately by debt holders. That is why we are shifting the bulk of the burden to debt holders, and because we couldn't impose a heavier haircut on the domestic debt holders in the first round of the debt restructuring, we had to use the balance sheet of the central bank to absorb that.
Now, my penultimate question to you, Prof, is this, that we've seen inflation softening. So basically, it's trending downwards. But the reality is that the rate at which the prices of goods and services are going up is quite frightening, especially food.
Yeah.
How do you explain that? Help us understand what's happening.
Okay, so typically when we say rate of inflation is coming down, it doesn't necessarily mean that prices are coming down.
Right.
What it means is that prices are now increasing at a reducing rate.
Right.
Okay. So you could still go to the market and realize that maybe the price of kinky had edged up slightly, even though we are saying that inflation is coming down. Because in reality, what it means that the rate at which prices were increasing, let's say a year ago or a month ago, is slowing down. And that is what it means. Now, again, if you look at the inflation that is reported, it's also the average. It's the average. So for instance, if you take the June inflation, depending on your location, your inflation will be different from other people in this country. So for instance, if you look at the regional disaggregation of inflation, you will see marginality, right? So for instance, as we speak right now, inflation is high in the north compared to the south. Okay, in the northeast, some places in Ghana, inflation is almost 80%. In some places, it's more than 70%. In some places, it's also less than the 42.5%. So you will see that marginality, you see that difference also across regions, even across districts. But then again, even as we have all gathered on this program this morning, we all carry different inflation rates. So your inflation rate will be different from mine because your inflation reflects your consumption basket. Okay, so your inflation will mirror your consumption pattern. My inflation will also mirror my consumption pattern. But at the end of the day, if we look at the average, we'll still say that inflation of prices, inflation is still high in Ghana, even compared to our neighbors or even the regional average. So for instance, if you look at the African Development Bank, their outlook from this year up to the end of 2024, Ghana's inflation is an outlier. It's one of the highest. Okay. And the African Development Bank is projecting that even our inflation will end 2024 at above 30%. Even though when government was presenting the 2023 budget, government was overly optimistic about dragging inflation down to 18.9%. And we said that was impossible, right? So now, if you look at the way government does their forecasting, everything put together also doesn't lend to policy credibility. If you put your best foot forward in your budget, remember the budget is not only a document for the government, it's a document for private sector because it becomes an input in their decision making. And that is why in the wisdom of the legislature, when they were passing the Public Financial Management Act, they considered that the budget at least should be passed, should be presented at least 1 month before the year of preceding the year of implementation. So Parliament, through the Public Financial Management Act, had set a clear deadline, maybe by November 17. The idea is that once the budget is presented in November, for the whole month of, let's say, December, private sector, banks, manufacturing firms, you and I can also look at the budget, incorporate that in our budgeting process. One key thing here to consider is, let's say, inflation. As an individual, you may not have the capacity to be able to forecast inflation for the year. So we outsource that responsibility to the government. So when the government presents the budget and says that inflation for 2023 will end the year with inflation of 18.9, it becomes an input in the decision making of private sector businesses. So for instance, one of the important considerations in wage negotiation is inflation. Okay, so if the government says that year-end inflation will be 18.9, If we all trust government, then that moderates the extent to which we can ask for salary adjustment, even though inflation is not the only variable. But then if government says inflation was going to be 18.9%, then 4 months into the implementation of the budget, inflation is way above 40%. It raises credibility issues. Again, it doesn't help businesses in pricing of their product.
Oh la la! Looks like we've lost Prof again. We're so sorry about that, viewers. We I don't know, but well, we'll try and raise Prof back on the line to conclude his submissions he's making about the difference between inflation trending downwards. Okay, Prof, it's good to have you back.
Yes.
We're so sorry about that. Yes.
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 So I don't know where
you were talking about,
but if you could just
yes, you're talking about the importance of inflation and how that influences how do you call it, how it is important to private sector, even for employees,
yeah,
you know, in terms of wage negotiations and so on.
So,
yes.
Precisely. The budget is an important document that we should not do politics with.
Okay.
Because it becomes an input in the decision making of households and private.
Okay. Well, what can I say? Again, we're sorry. If we're able to get Prof to wrap up, that would be beautiful, because it was just about to land and we don't want him to crash land. But let's take a break. Yes, let's take a break. This is Inside Pages on Metro Television. The WhatsApp line is 055 3000035. 055 3000035. That's a WhatsApp line for you. I know that you have an opinion or there's some contribution that you want to make. So we'll take a break. When we come back from the break, hopefully we'll get Prof to land properly, about 2 minutes or so, and then we can move to our second topic, which has to do with the president's dismissing assertions that he's supporting one of the candidates in the internal MPP contest, and whether we can trust what the president has said. If indeed we have to trust what the president has said, what does the president have to do beyond just saying he doesn't support any of the candidates, or it's enough? In any case, maybe the assertion or the claim or the suspicion was born out of nothing. We'll be back. All right, welcome back. This is Inside Pages on Metro Television. My name is Aldo Moro. So the WhatsApp line is 055 3000035. We're having a very interesting conversation, a very insightful one indeed, with Professor Bokpin, who was helping us understand what is in it for you and I as far as the 2023 media budget review, which was presented by the finance minister, is concerned. But we lost him. Thankfully, we have Prof back on the line. So, Prof, welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah. Apologies for the connectivity issues. Yeah.
Yes, I can speak on behalf of my viewers. They're fine. We apology accepted, sir.
Thank you.
All right. So if we can, so in conclusion, Prof, would you say that we're in for some tough times or tougher times, judging from what the finance minister has said? And also finally, the finance minister, in an untypical fashion, says he's not going to ask for a supplementary budget, and he gives his reasons why. I don't want to delve into those reasons. Would you say that it was expected? I mean, you would have been surprised if he had asked for a supplementary budget. So 2 questions in one.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So I think what I would say with respect to the first one is that we have to be moderate with our expectations.
Okay.
We are not out of the woods yet. We are still a long way to go. But the most important thing is that, you see, we have been talking about recovery, but do we have an idea what this recovery is? Mm-hmm. What is in it for every Ghanaian? The economy may recover, but it may not recover for the ordinary Ghanaian. We can see improvement, but that improvement can leave so many Ghanaians behind. So the important thing we need to ask ourselves is, what are the clear yardstick indicators of this economic recovery so that when it is present, we all can identify with it. My considered view is that any economic recovery Ghana is talking about must respond to the worsening inequality, must respond to the worsening poverty level. Is very important. Any recovery Ghana is looking at or hoping to have must respond to the dynamics of the private sector. As you can see right now, our tax environment is anti-growth. There are too many taxes. You import something from the port and see the layers of taxes. Go to the shop and buy something. Taxes today take more space on your receipt than the items that you bought. You cannot look at this and say you are having recovery. The recovery must preserve cash flow for households and private sector in order for them to expand in terms of private sector growth, because that is where job creation will come from. And then also it must preserve cash flow for households in order for them to maximize their utility. These are very important. But putting all the figures together, looking at what is happening at the global level, the global geopolitics, geoeconomic fragmentation, and even within ECOWAS, what is happening across the continent and all of that, I think we need to be very moderate. We need to be realistic in terms of our expectations. The other bit also is that, is there room to ask for more from Ghanaians? I don't think so. I was actually expecting that in the media review, government was going to take another look at some of the tax handles. And once it didn't happen, my expectation is that in the substantive budget to be presented in November this year for 2024, at least when it comes to VAT, my proposal, and I've said that on a number of platforms, that our standard VAT rate, even though it's 15%, if you add the street levies of 6% to that, and you model the cascading effect, it's more than 21%. And that is anti-growth. That will worsen poverty. That will worsen inequality. So my considered view is that we should consider, and Parliament should consider, merging the street levy with the standard VAT rate and peg it at below 18%. If your VAT rate, standard VAT rate is 17%, 18%, an additional increase, a 1% increase above that is counterproductive. Okay. The literature is very clear, okay, and we need to look at it from that point. But I think that it also requires that government, in their projections and posture, they reflect the reality and the pain on the ground.
Right.
And so that, but what I will say in conclusion is that, yes, we are looking forward to a recovery. The recovery will be slow and it will be painful.
Okay. All right, Prof, thank you so very much. It's always a pleasure talking to you because of the enlightening conversations that you share with us, media, and of course, and to the general public. We're so grateful for your time. Thank you so very much and have a good day, sir.
Thank you. God bless you.
And God bless you too. That's Professor GODFRED BOKPIN. He is an economist and also a professor of finance. He's a lecturer, in fact, senior lecturer at University of Ghana Business School. So that's it for the conversation on the mid-year budget review. Now,